Hi. So now we're in chapter 14 on personality, right? And they have a very general definition of personality at the beginning of the chapter. It's just an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. So this is just the idea we have certain ways, habitual ways, or inborn, right? That's part of the debate here. Ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving, right? And you've got a number of different approaches they mention in this chapter. I believe it's 4 total different approaches that we eventually talk about in chapter 14 to personality. The first one, of course, is psychodynamic theories. This is Freud, the Freudian stuff. And I mentioned, of course, id, ego, superego in relationship to dreams. And we saw some wacky stuff there with Freud in terms of the latent content and manifest content of a dream. That's just scratching the surface. Okay, we're going to get into some more wackiness here with Freud and some really big wackiness. And I guess I should say, we've got an adult warning here that, we're going to be mentioning adult type things well, I don't know adult type things, but a lot of stuff about sex with Freud, right? Freud he just put a lot of emphasis on sex being really important in a lot of controversial ways, right? But anyway, so psychodynamic theories is just the view of personality, right? That really emphasizes the unconscious mind, the importance of the unconscious mind, right? This big id. And also, they really emphasize, in psychodynamic approaches, the importance of childhood experiences as well, right? So psychodynamic approaches to personality or psychodynamic theories of personality really emphasize the unconscious and childhood experiences as shaping our personality and who we are as an individual. If I can clear my throat. So they mentioned specifically psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis was basically Freud's theory of personality of the individual, and it also refers to his particular therapeutic approach in treating patients, in which the emphasis was to basically discover these in the unconscious mind, these repressed things from our childhood experiences, and there's always something dealing with sex as far as Freud was concerned. I don't know, it's just maybe that was the time period in which Freud lived. It was, in the English, in the British world, I guess you call it the Victorian era, right? Sex was repressed. It was not discussed in public, right? And it was scandalous if a woman showed her ankle or something, So society really repressed the open discussion of sex, and so Freud, I think, saw that at his time as he saw that pattern, and maybe he attributed that to human beings and the human mind, which I think he's off on that. And of course, his approach, as we said back in the prologue, is not scientific. You can't really test this stuff experimentally. So it's wacky. Anyway, they do mention the id, ego, and superego here, right? Which we've already discussed in chapter 3 in relationship to dreaming. So in your textbook, page 573, right, you got that figure of like an iceberg in the ocean. And this is the way icebergs really are in the ocean, right? Just the tip of the iceberg is above water level. Most of the iceberg is below water level. And so in this figure, they're talking about the tip of the iceberg that's above water is the part of our mind that is conscious, that we're consciously aware of what's happening. But most of it is down below the water. Most of what's taking place in our mind is unconscious and unbeknownst to us on a conscious level, right? And so you do have to get clues to what's going on in that unconscious mind when you're doing psychoanalysis. And one way they do that was the dream interpretation stuff. Have a patient share their dreams, and then the therapist would figure out, what's the latent content of it, what's it really about. Of course, that's coming from it's coming from the unconscious mind, right? But they do also mention free association here. You might just have the patient lie on the couch and say whatever pops into their mind. And that might give you clues as to what's going on in the unconscious mind as well. And then later in this chapter, they mention projective tests of personality. Projective tests are tests that are designed to, the idea is anyway, to get clues about what's going on in the person's unconscious mind. The most famous of these projective tests was the Rorschach ink blot test that you may have heard of. The problem with projective tests is that they are very unreliable. You don't get the same thing every time, so it's unpredictable. So they're not the best tests. But some therapists still might use them, believing that there's some unconscious stuff going on. These tests, projective tests, might enable them to understand some of this stuff that's going on in the individual's unconscious mind, right? So remember, the id is ruled by the pleasure principle. The id is completely unconscious, as you can see in that figure, right? Completely unconscious. At the kind of opposite extreme from the id, which has the pleasure principle, opposite extreme, you have superego, right? Which is kind of the conscience or the cop on the beat, kind of making sure and doing everything it can to make sure that the id stays in the unconscious mind. Part of the superego is unconscious. Also, part of it is conscious. I mean, on a conscious level, I do have, well, we said it's like your conscience, right? So it tells me what's right, what's wrong, that sort of stuff. And I'm aware of some of that on a conscious level. And then, of course, you see the ego, right, caught between those two. The ego ruled by that reality principle I said back in chapter 3, where basically it tries to balance out kind of the other two extremes in your mind, right? So I said ego, superego, and okay, next video we're getting some really wacky stuff with Freud. Bizarre.